an ÖFG Peaceful Change lecture. And in the broad sense, obviously, one can talk about peaceful change in many different ways. And today we're going to venture out a little bit into IPE, into the international political economy. And doing so, we're going to do that with the help of Professor Oliver Kessler. And please join me in giving him a big round of applause.
I have to start it.
And Oliver and I, long time ago, we studied together for our undergrad at the University of Munich. Actually, with one professor was really, yeah, we did. You're just a little younger than me, that's all. And so you may, some of my students, you may find some resemblances, and you can trace back actually to a professor that taught both of us. And a few words about Oliver. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Erfurt, and was before that in Groningen, and before that many other places. I think one of his features is that he likes to venture out a little bit into the unknown. So he played around with a couple of really complicated concepts, the quantum, for instance, that I always find quite impressive. Also dealt with concepts, giving them a little bit of a different twist, like legitimacy was one of them. Has worked for a long time on communication and international relations, coming originally from a Luhmann perspective, and then developing all of that further. And does, apart from publishing a lot, does a lot of other things as well. So amongst other things, he is now the editor of the European Journal of International Relations. So one of those journals that we always torture you with articles and everything, and seminars and courses and everything. So that is a journal that Oliver takes care of at the moment. Yeah? And he's going to talk for about half an hour. And then we're going to open up for questions and answers. And Oliver, I'm really looking forward to that. So, and you as well, have fun.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for coming on a Friday, 6 o'clock p.m. As a student, I know that you have maybe other problems and plans and then listening to me. So I really appreciate you being here. Also, thanks, Markus, for the nice introductions. Always when I'm introduced, I always wonder, who is this guy? I really would like to know him. I just... sounds awkward, strange to listen to what I've done and where I've been, and where I want to go, maybe. Also, thanks, Markus, for allowing me to present on short notice. Because, you should know, I almost imposed myself onto Markus, because, and this is something that I want to put out quite at the start, because I'm having a conceptual issue and problem that I'm dealing with in two papers at the moment. The one is on climate change and central banking. The other one is on failures. And I do today what you should never do in a talk. Bring them together. In the hope they're not like, what do you say, potato salad and vanilla rice. Individually great, but when you put them on one plate, not so great. So, having heard that, that the Viennese audience is very generous in feedback, I am standing here in front of you. It sounds like a movie, doesn't it? No, not as a young girl. For feedback, because allowing me to present allows me also to think through some of the issues that I have to, where I'm struggling at the moment. If it works, you helped me tremendously. If it doesn't, you helped me tremendously as well. So I hope that the next 15 to 20 minutes will be worth your while. So to start with the presentation, we have to go back a couple of years, 2015. Sounds short time, but at that time, the world looks much happier. There was still optimism that we can save climate change and everything's possible. That's 2015, 7 years ago. I mean, 7 years ago, my beard was not so gray, and I looked much more like the guy on the posters. But 2015 is also the conference where the climate change conference, the COP in Paris, was underway. And in preparation of that, the G20 actually asked the Financial Stability Board, which, in case you're not familiar with any of these institutions, please let me know, because otherwise I will talk past you, and that should not happen. The Financial Stability Board is one of these tiny institutions at the Bank of International Settlement who is very known for its conceptual work and who explores the terrains of systemic risks and finance and coordinates a lot of these endeavors. And they asked what climate change actually means for finance. And at that time, this guy was at both the governor of the Bank of England and chairperson of the Financial Stability Board. And they asked him, essentially, to explore the terrain. And at that time, also the Bank of England issued the first reports exploring what climate change means. And they figured out that if we enter a scenario with 3+ degrees of global warming, we essentially wipe out global finance as we know it, because essentially all the assets that we know become worthless. At the same time, they also, I mean, that came as a shock. I mean, 50% of global assets gone. So they figured something has to be done, and they figured that this is an issue that is not just for activists, but it's something that economists and those working in the central bank should be worried about. At the same time, he gave a talk, and when he issued the report, he gave a talk in front of Lloyd's, where he, for the first time, publicly talked about this issue. And there he said, Lloyd's, insurance, and said, well, I'm talking to you about climate change because you're the persons who are most exposed to it. We know about extreme weather, we know about the costs, we know that this is serious and we're on it. And the talk was called Tragedy of the Horizons. And in that talk, it's interesting, he somehow said, well, there are of course these physical risks that we know with extreme weather. When a hurricane cost that and that billions of dollars in order to rebuild the houses. We know that. But there are also the transition risks. And that's a nice concept. Transition risks are those risks that we know that we have to move to a low carbon economy somehow. That's what he said. We know. If we don't, we wipe out 50% of global assets, and therefore we have a financial stability issue. So we need to somehow secure 1.5 degrees somehow. But if we would do that tomorrow, we would also destabilize global financial markets because all the brown assets become worthless. And and given the magnitude of all these assets, that destabilizes financial security. So we have to find a balance. We move too fast, we destabilize the economic structures as we know it. If we move too slow, we risk to enter a scenario which is unhealthy for all of us. But 2015, there's the optimism. He was sure that a market in the transition to a 2-degree world can be built. It has the potential to put forward adjustment, but only if information is available, crucially if policy and responsive governments and the technological breakthroughs of the private sector are credible. With better information as a foundation, we can build a virtuous circle of better understanding tomorrow risks, better pricing for investors, better decisions by policymakers, and a smoother transition to a low carbon economy. Sounds familiar? That's the standard recipe of how economists usually tackle questions of financial stability. Every actor needs to have the same information in order to make the informed decisions and therefore evaluate risks. And that was the first wave of policy responses. There was a task force led by the Climate-Related Financial Disclosure Task Force, led by Michael Bloomberg, who went out and developed standards that is adopted by the industry to disclose financial risks, climate-related financial risks in companies. And they were very successful, and they pride themselves with that they are very successful about doing that. There's no problem with that. But a couple of years, fast forward, a couple of years later, Schnabel, who is a member of the Financial Stability Governing Board, said there were deep-seated market failures continue to prevent the transition towards a carbon-neutral economy at the pace that is required to ward off the exceptional and partly irresistible risk that climate change poses to society. So a couple of years later, she realizes that the market's not doing it. That the failures that are seated within markets don't lead us to the required result that we want. So something's wrong. And she said she tries to get to it by changing the discourse around market failures. What has changed? Of course, there's some learning about a couple of years where new information comes, new information, some beliefs are updated. But there's also a discursive change within central bankers. In 2017, the network for the greening of the financial systems was inaugurated in Paris, and that somehow changed the discourse in central banks, because then it was not about passive mirroring market structures and try to equal out the market forces that are underway. Well, it was they changed the vocabulary much more to, we have given our balance sheets and given the kind of assets that we hold, what is our footprint? How do we have to actually interact with assets in the world and all these measures that were underway in order to secure or move towards a greener finance? How can we actually change the structures of the market? And how can we, and that's the word that they used, build a coalition of the willing? Heard that before? A coalition of the willing to save finance. And since 2017, central bankers have become much more active and have developed a much more active stance towards saving the environment by and through the measures of finance. 2020, just have an ear problem, sorry for that. So if I touch my ear, it's something that sounds like water, but nothing to do. The Green Swan report was published. Green Swan report was published, which is an incredible document. If you can have a look at it, please do, because it's fascinating. The Green Swan plays with the concept of the black swan, in case you become familiar with that. It's one of these very unlikely events, the tale of the risk, which, if nevertheless it manifests, it will alter the structures of the systems overall. And they played with that image of, and then the literature around the black swan, by calling it the green swan. And the green swan, here's a nice quote, says, well, green swans are different from black swans in three regards. First, although the impacts of climate change are highly uncertain, there's a high degree of certainty that some combination of physical and transition risks will materialize in the future. And they here quote the Network for the Greening of the Financial System 2019. That is, there's certainly about the need for ambitious action despite prevailing uncertainty regarding the timing and nature of impacts of climate change. So what you see here is less the optimism of Mark Carney saying, a market for 2 degrees can be built. We have to balance the temporality. We cannot move too quickly. We cannot act too cautiously. We have to find the right balance, but we're getting there. Mark Carney. And we need the right information, and everybody builds the infrastructure, the knowledge infrastructure in order to make informed decisions, and we'll get there. This quote points to something else. It says, oh my God, we have to act, otherwise something goes wrong, terribly wrong. and this is irreversible. So we don't have the time to act for the market to work. We don't have the time to let it just play out, because the risks that we enter into 3 to 4 degrees is there. We have to be much more proactive. We have to be much more oriented to certain goals. I could play the Luhmann thing between conditional and circular, but we have to secure the goals, and therefore become much more active in our interactions. And they propose a dual epistemological break in the report, which I found interesting. What can I say? I don't want to mock anybody, but usually epistemology is not the vocabulary that you get in a central bank report. Usually not. But they also talk about the dual epistemological. Because they say, well, first of all, the past doesn't work. All the statistical risk measures and measurement practices that we have become accustomed to use, they don't work when we try to avoid a future that is known to us. When we try to avoid a future that is pretty much already there, but we need to steer from it. Much more, no, let's not get there. So the past doesn't work, we need future-oriented. At the same time, they have to act now. That's what they call the 5 Cs, contribute to the combat of climate change. And they are much more active in that. Now, usually, that's where the first paper is. I would go to this guy. Familiar? Foucault. Where he says, if you're looking at the 2 lectures on governmentality, he has some nice things about open and closed future and how the market actually operates on an unknown future. Sorry for that, unknown future. But how the Anthropocene actually poses a known future and how that doesn't work. That's the first paper. Now, second paper, and you haven't figured out. I want to start with the notion of failure because it's interesting that Schnabel used the notion of failure. And it's quite interesting that the notion of failure can be used in this regard. How is it possible that the market fails for that objective that we have? And usually we don't look at failure because it's one of the fleeting concepts. Usually we're much more interested in those who are responsible for failures, how the failures can be solved or regulated, and the lessons learned. We don't look at the concept of failure itself and what the concept itself does. So I'm much more now interested in the concept and what the concept does and the performative consequences of using failure in this regard, rather than mistake, higher force, luck, or whatever alternative concept. And I identify 3 notions of failure. Because failure usually is fleeting, but at the same time, if you think about it, failure is already the notion where we allocate guilt, accountability, responsibility. Who's responsible? Who's to be held accountable? All these questions, which are deeply political, start there by the identification of something as a failure. So I want to, instead of having it fleeting and disappear, I want to focus on it before it disappears already. So hold it. As I see, what's happening? What's happening when somebody uses failure? I say, well, we can actually identify 3 notions of failure. The first is something that we're all familiar with. Something goes wrong empirically. House burns down, and somebody made a failure. The 2 trains hit each other because the guy who was responsible failed to actually pay attention, and therefore fell asleep or played computer games. The last one wasn't there a crash where the guy actually played computer games and then the 2 trains hit? Human failure. So it's something that we can observe empirically that runs counter the expectations that we have. The bridge is supposed to hold, but unlucky for those who were in Genoa, it failed and it crumbled and people died. So failure is something where one actor faces a reality that is uncertain, has to make decisions, but has expectations towards how things are and how things behave, and that's interrupted somehow. And then this becomes a failure. The second notion of failure is slightly different, because then the question is not who is responsible, what happened, we have examinations in what actually went wrong, but it's linked to communication. One of my, not sure of, I just learned we are streaming, so I hope that my wife's not listening. Because, everybody who's married for a while knows that you enter in situations where communication fails. Not because something empirically goes wrong, because something you say is misunderstood. Of course, it's always my fault. I learned that over 20 years. But the thing is, the discourse that then operates is not about, what happened and what is the empirical investigations and what actually caused that failure to happen. But then what happens usually is a second layer of discourse, which is, you said that, but that's not what I meant. Familiar? Oh, but you said, no, I didn't mean it that way. What I actually meant is, so what you try to do here is not to point to some empirical irregularity, but to clarify the position from which you are arguing towards the other. So it's not about you interacting with the world and hoping that the bridge holds. It's about the constellation of actors, usually two, who have expectations about how to communicate, and they are mutually constituted, and therefore you clarify the position in order to keep the relationship going. But this is when communication fails. And we know that how often do we have politicians telling us, oh no, that's not what I meant. And no, you have to see that, and I meant it this way. Some US president was quite a master in it. It's not about empirics. The empirics is not the important point. It's about the position and clarifying one's own position in that communication. But it's a communication failure. It's not an empirical failure. That is. Because, The third one is what I would say is a mode of organization, where we say, usually we use that relationship, communication thing, already when the two actors are in place. Husband and wife. You are a married couple, and therefore communication collapses, has to be repaired, has to go on. But you already have that position. You already have that institutional fact about the marriage in place. You are here because of the institution of the university. Students, I'm the professor, I'm here, you're there are certain expectations. And if I fail to make my claim, maybe it's a communication, maybe it's one of organization, maybe something shouldn't be organized in the way they are because of the kind of precisions that are possible or impossible, because of the kind of knowledge that is enacted or silenced, or about, let me take two examples. You identify something as a market problem, and you already have an entire set of institutions and experts in place about what can be done and what cannot be done. An entire structure and vocabulary in which things can be talked about. But also a certain set of arguments that are valid and convincing, and certain others not. I have to go to the dentist is not an economic argument. Justice usually is not a good economic argument. Social problems only becomes an economic argument if translated in these numbers and statistics that are relevant for actually evaluating policies. The same goes with justice. You have a justice problem. Maybe a lawyer, somebody, but the expertise of a lawyer and the expertise of economists is completely differently structured. Different vocabularies, different temporalities, different arguments, and different. So depending on how you frame things, already you've put in place somebody who's in authority to speak about it and somebody who's not. So the third one is about inclusion, exclusion. It's about who's in authority, who is able and allowed to speak, and who is silent, who is not able to speak. In which vocabulary can we speak? In which vocabulary do you have to translate your claims in order to be understood and made? And with it comes, of course, an entire set of hierarchies. In international relations, we have an entire debate about hierarchies and how hierarchies are constituted. And one of the things that I'm trying to settle here is then it's in the vocabulary that we use, and of arguments that are possible. Now, what I try to get at, given these three notions of failure, and I hope that you bear with me that these are three different ways in which we can use failure. Empirics, communication, as a mode of organization. I would say that what central bankers and Schnabel try to get at is that third notion. The third notion that the market as a mode of organization doesn't work for the purpose that we are after. And you see that because, and I'd see that it destabilizes market as the primary solution for climate change. The self-understanding of central banks changes from market mirrors to shapers of the future. It calls into question the way central bankers know. In the Greenspan report, actually, they mock standard economics for their failure of understanding ecological issues. It's interesting, it's intriguing, given the kind of knowledge infrastructure that was in place before. Suddenly, it's not the dominant vocabulary in which we're supposed to make sense of what's going on. And they move to the vocabulary of complex adaptive systems and go to earth science and whatever. I'm not an expert on this, but it's interesting to see that Foucault would say the visible central banks and the sayable economic discourse get destabilized because of climate change and the kind of critique that they're getting at. But at the same time, and this is where I'm at the moment, is that we are in the talk then, it all collapses to the first notion of critique as an empirical irregularity. We focus on how much carbon, the price, or the carbon price. We talk about the degree, 1.5, 2. We talk about statistics, standards, and whatever. But therefore, all the evidence, all the arguments are empirically driven, and therefore the second and the third notions of critique get eclipsed, sidelined. Therefore, I'm not sure why that is. I have a sense that this has to do with the kind of temporality that the market is operating on. But what I then try to get at is that at the moment it looks to me that we lack the vocabulary within economic reasoning to engage with the second and the third kind of critique, especially the third one, because it's been market dominated. And the problem is that it's subject to the economic vocabulary, which we cannot get out of. And therefore, I'm afraid that we cannot get to the third critique and cannot take out, and therefore probably will not secure the 1.5, because what's happening now is that who's responsible? The states are responsible. We have to do that. We have to do that. There's also, so it's all about the numbers. And I think that this is the inadequate vocabulary in which that critique is leveled. With here I stop. Thanks for your patience and looking forward to your questions and arguments. Thanks.
Oliver, thanks a lot. I think there was a lot of... Yeah, sit next to me, yes. I think there was a lot on conceptual issues. There was a lot on empirical issues. So feel free to ask whatever questions you may have.
Hello. Hello, Professor. Thank you very much for the talk. And it was actually... It brought me to think, let's say. I'm less of a conceptual kind of person, so I'm having a hard time with that. But I wanted to give you an example of where I think that central bank and their mandate is in direct conflict with, let's say, attaining 2% goal or protecting the environment in general. And that is, if we look at the last decade, for example, especially the time where we actually had low interest rates and unconventional monetary policy, meaning asset purchasing programs, which were in no way based on the criteria of sustainability. Central banks, by trying to maintain price stability, actually fostered unsustainable assets. Let's say coal, oil, nuclear energy, even weapons for that matter. But that is to me a typical conflict which is hard to avoid. Because the mandate, and that is a legal issue now, I would say, is not about attaining a 2% goal, but it is about price stability. And if we say, okay, you look for sustainability in purchasing programs, for example, you may face the problem that green energy assets are highly speculative, and a central bank should not be a venture capitalist. Yeah, that would be my point here. Thank you very much.
Oliver, want to respond straight?
Yes, I agree. That's the discourse that essentially fostered by that's pushed by the Network for the Greening of Financial System. That says, well, we have to become venture capitalists. We have to secure, where's the money coming from for the development of green technology? It has to become not directly from the center, but they need to somehow foster and facilitate exactly that kind of rapid innovation. And I'm not the expert on center. I take rather this. I'm more the conceptual type of guy. Sorry for that. But to say that the change in discourses that they are, I find it astounding and astonishing and brilliant and fascinating. And I'm very grateful, not for the global warming, no, but for the current, shall we say, disorientation that lingered on in that discourse. You could see that. So this is also, there was a report by, I think, was it Greenpeace that was held up by Lagarde? Yannis Dafermos, who's one of the co-authors, about look at your own footprint that you're having with exactly these unconventional monetary issues, and if you continue like that, you're actually contradicting these policies. Now, interesting enough, they're talking about changing the mandate. I think the Bank of England already did. So there is that understanding that something more fundamental has to change. Now, I don't want to throw in big words, but now that I said it, I have to. But I find it, see, the self-understanding of, as far as I understand, I'm not the expert on center, but I mean, I've been looking at it on and off again for a couple of years, but it's always been, oh, we're just like, we're mirroring market structures and we're solving technical issues. We're, in the sense, not politicians, we're technicians. We solve and the understanding was very technique-oriented. In that discourse, that's all gone. And this is fascinating, because it's like, we have to save the world. Not sure whether we want central bankers to save the world, because usually that's not the type of scape where Hollywood movies are. Usually that are like Ant-Man or somebody who saves the world. But, I mean, interesting that they have this understanding. We need to save the world. We need to change the climate. It's us. It's on us. Nobody else is doing it. And they're saying it. Of course, we would rather have the politicians solve it, but given that they're not doing it, we have to do it. Which is, in my understanding, the end of neoliberal thought as we knew it from the 90s. And all that has gone, like, I lived through, not sure whether you lived through 2008 crisis. I did. Also, fascinating, shocking, and grateful for that experience somehow, because, I mean, it was thrilling. I mean, you didn't know whether the financial system would be around for the next week. And there was an interview by Ackermann who's about, it was 5 minutes before they wouldn't refill the ATM machines. And if people realize that they don't get cash out of the ATMs, then that's when it materializes. Everything else is abstract. And I've done some work on that. But the 2008 didn't change the discourse that much. I mean, there is the systemic risk literature. But it's all still in the same understanding. It's technique. It's very. I mean, reserved. This is different, and this is what I find interesting. And I think it has something to do with the notion of failure. Sorry for a longer response that I wanted to.
Thank you. Yes, in the back.
I try to be short now.
Hello, thank you for your talk. My name is Judith. I'm a second-year student, and I got caught up in the notion of failure, and the 3 notions of failure. And I was trying to put the idea of our failure in the climate crisis into a box. And I was thinking it is, I mean, to some degree, perhaps a communication failure, because we have too much authorship. Anyone can post anything about everything, and that's a problem. But it isn't really where we failed with the climate crisis. So we also have the mode of organization, which, as you said, is a system that's just not working anymore, but also there really isn't a better system. And for the empirical irregularity, it also really isn't that either, because it has always been our system. So climate change is nothing like, I don't know, the burning the toast, right? It's not a closed event. It's something that has been going on for a long time, and it's still going on. It hasn't ended yet. So this is how we have behaved for years and years. And I mean, the big companies, and especially in oil and plastic, have known about the problem for like 50 years now. So it's nothing new. It's not an irregularity. It's just how we performed. We know about it. There is enough literature about it. There's enough people talking about it. Everyone knows we're running right into the fire. So in the 3 notions of failure, where do you think that our failure in the climate crisis is at home, or in what box does it fit? Thank you.
Thanks. So first of all, thanks. We have something in common. I'm also caught up with the notion of failure because I find it very intriguing and I can't let go. But maybe I should, but I can't. I think the failure is that, I try to put it in words. I mean, we have a sense that, and even the Green Swan report, it says that the way societies are organized today in territoriality dysfunctional states is at least unhelpful for solving climate change issues. They're talking in the Green Swan report about a fundamental necessity, or a necessity to fundamentally reorganize the political landscape as we know it. So they touch upon, and I think we all feel it, that we touch upon this failure in the mode of organization. I think that's where it's located, that we want to understand different institutional landscapes. And I don't have a solution to that. That's the next paper in 3 weeks. Did I tell you?
No.
No, but so we have a sense that it doesn't work the way. But what's happening? I mean, and now, of course, I mean, all that I have to offer here are gut feelings. I mean, that we have it as a generational conflict isn't very helpful. That we have it that we have now the migration crisis is not helpful. I mean, not because of the migrants, but because, I mean, I'm not sure whether this is really the correct number, but I mean, a friend of mine, he pointed out that if things really go wrong with climate change, we're not talking about a couple of thousands. We talk about 140 millions who are on the way. How do you hold them back? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So all the right-wing parties should actually be for climate change as much as they could in order to, I mean, but they don't. That's schizophrenic to the bones. But I say, we have this feeling about the mode of organization, but we focus on the discourse in economics is on this first notion of climate, on market failures in that very traditional sense, which I think doesn't get us there and which doesn't allow us for this reflexivity that is necessary to actually talk about this. And I think we don't have the forum, maybe, to talk about these alternative modes of organization. We don't, because we're caught up in the vocabularies that we have, and we like the alternatives. Moment.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor. That was very inspiring and also remind me of some concept I heard about climate change. So there was some disagreement between developed and developing countries about the quota of carbon emission. So, I heard of a concept to equalize the right of carbon emissions to the right of development. So it's like, for example, if the quota is cited nowadays, maybe in the future, if one certain country or several countries they want to develop, they have to pay for that right to emit carbon. So I feel like this is some example or notion of using price or using numbers to evaluate the action a country takes to deal with climate change. I just would like to know how you evaluate this kind of notion. Thank you.
Easy one. Thanks. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Everything that I say probably is wrong. I will look into it. Thanks for pointing it out, but I haven't looked into it at all. Sorry for that. But yeah, there are different stories and different things that come to mind. I will not go there because I talk too much anyway. Sorry. Yes.
I'm Leanders. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I had a question regarding the vocabulary that you seem lacking to describe this mode of organization, this failure, basically. Do you think that this vocabulary exists in other disciplines, for example, and should become more focus of the current economic discourses? Or do you just think these vocabularies, they seem not to be there, not to exist in general to describe that failure of mode of organization we have?
If it's there somewhere, I really would like to find it. But at the moment, my feeling, and it's really just a feeling, is that there is a certain allocation of, or language games, Wittgenstein would call it, there are certain language games. You have the legal, the economic, and the political. We talk about nation states and balance of power and whatever we have. And even the Marxists, they're not helpful. And usually I like my Marxist students. They're always fun. I miss them sometimes. So I think at the moment it's something that we have been trained to think in a certain way, that there is a certain allocation of problems and vocabulary. So we know when a problem is an economic problem or a legal problem, or when it becomes a political issue, and then there are different disciplines who provide us with certain answers. I think we are caught in that mode of thinking, and I just feel that what the Anthropocene poses to us is not solved by the established vocabularies that we have, but how to get out of this, I don't see it, and therefore I am very skeptical about how things develop.
Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm a MIS2 student. My question is, I spent the summer working at Department of Energy Resources, and one of the things we were doing was trying to encourage the energy transition into happening. And one of the major sources of CO2 emissions is in the transportation sector. I have two questions, actually. One is, how big of a role should central banks play in trying to influence these large oil companies, natural gas companies into transitioning? And also, is the fear of failure playing a role in how slowly the market is changing or not changing to combat climate change, so to say?
Thanks. The fear of failure is a brilliant concept. I haven't thought about the fear of failure. Is actually, it could be really interesting. Thanks. The first question: what role should central banks play when they, whether they should pressure oil companies to? Here I would go back to, what's your name again? Sorry, Judith. Given the track record that they have, I don't have any trust in them leading the way. If they do, I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, really. But they have to. Simply, if they take their vocabulary of responsible investor, which they developed since 2017, seriously, they have to develop that kind of engagement, at least, with the brown economy to turn green, blue, or whatever color there is next month, purple, maybe in 2 years. But so they have to, whether they should or at least it's a try. But if we continue like that, I don't know. What's your experience, if I can ask you?
With the Bureau, it's more industry-led and government-supported. So a lot of it, for example, we went to Shell and they were like, yeah, we're supporting University of Houston in building all of these different decarbonization technologies. And then Shell then is responsible for implementing this on a large scale. Government would help subsidize that. I don't know really how it is in comparison to central banking. Didn't really do that bit, but...
the question that you ask is essentially about greenwashing.
Yeah.
And there is no question about that there's loads going on that. Can I tell a story? I'm not sure why I talk too much. So it's because I'm so grateful that I am here in Vienna, one of my favorite cities in the world. Simply because also my mother is from Austria, so here we are. But next to Erfurt, where I'm now living, there is now Cattle, a big Chinese battery manufacturers, and they build a factory there, which is impressive. It's a village. It's right next to Arnstadt also, and I was told if that blows up, Arnstadt is gone, which is maybe fair because Arnstadt is the eldest city, so maybe it's also fair if they go first. But once you enter there are no environmental standards whatsoever. The kind of chemistry and the kind of energy that is used in that factory is astounding. That factory, chemicals are heated up to 40 degrees, frozen, and if everything's done, the batteries have to learn. Do you know what so they're put in big, staples of shelves where each battery has to learn. So it's heated up and frozen down. The kind of energy that there is, and there is no isolation whatsoever in that factory. So that factory consumes the energy almost as much as Erfurt, which is a 200,000 inhabitant city. So it's significant. When they filled the water tanks, the entire region didn't have water anymore because the pressure went down. They said, it's a failure. We just took too much at the same time. But it will repair. But all that. And as far as I know, and this is and I still have to verify it, so in brackets, that doesn't count into the statistics because it's for the production of environment-friendly technology. And if that's true, then, and that's one factory, and we know that they built 20 in a week. If that's true, that factory is built to last 5 to 6 years, 10 years maybe. Then it's gone. And they build a new one, and they build a new one. And the kind of energy that goes into that, not only the materials that they use, in the construction of these things, but also in the operation, it's just, whether, I don't want to sound like a skeptic, not at all. I do everything I can, but whether you heat your living room 1 degree more or less, we all do our shares, but this is in comparison to that. And apparently it doesn't count. It's not in the statistics. I found that I still have to verify, but if that's true, I find that very disorienting. And if that's the level of greenwashing that's going on in one factory, imagine all the statistics that we have about what is more environmentally friendly about e-cars or not and whatever. Yeah. And I don't want to get into these debates because everybody's having good reasons maybe, but then the numbers don't work. The numbers simply don't work. And I looked into derivatives for a while and CDOs and whatever there was. And with that, you can do wonderful things. So I think I already got used to the idea that all the numbers are nonsense anyway. Because, you can essentially temporalize all your debts until forever. You can fabricate numbers as you want, essentially. But, and we know what Greece did in order to do that. That's the kind of, but this, I think, takes it to another level. And so, greenwashing, yes, definitely. Can the central banks save us from that? No. Should they try? Yes, please do. Hopefully you're successful. Good luck. Can I do it? No.
Let's do one last round of questions, and there are lots of them up, and let's just do one after the other in a bundle, okay? And I'm just going to go left to right, and then I'm going to add a little something to it as well. Victor, I think you were on the, yeah.
Victor Maestro, hi.
Hi.
So I'll play around a bit with the black swan, green swan concept. So just from a brief look at the report while you were talking, the Green Swan report describes potential climate disasters as those carrying harsher negative effects than those financial economic disasters previously characterized as black swans by Taleb in the original theory. And now we are, and well, the central banks and us here, in a way, trying to figure out how to predict and even prevent the appearance of green swans. But isn't it wrong? We have to interact with the inevitability of green swans' existence, similarly to Taleb's theory, that we should learn to live with black swans coming, whether we want it or not. So maybe we shouldn't focus that much on prevention at this point, as we should learn to live with the failures. And to this, kind of to quote Antonio Guterres recently, who said, "The era of global warming has ended and the era of global boiling has arrived." So maybe we should focus on living with this boiling and focusing on cooling it down or finding solutions how to survive in it, rather than still trying to think, how to stop it happening, because it's already on the way. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think Victoria, yes. Did you have a hand? Yeah.
So I'm Victoria. I am a second-year student at the DA, and my question, so surprisingly, I'm doing research on central bank's green mandate. So this is such a, I was very surprised. So, and I was doing recently literature review, and for now, what I found out, and also the main concern, for example, by Waltz 2017, he was discussing the mandate of central banks, and also that he underlined that this is more political question. And talking about central bank independence, what do you think? will we have a conflict looking and might this threaten the central bank's independence? Because like in most of research that I read, this is not the mandate of central banks. This is more political question. So might we have the pressure from governments to central banks and which might threaten the central bank independence? Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then I think Johannes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Can you hear that? My name is Johannes, second year MISE. I want to go back to the theoretical. I really love the three notions of failure. Where in those three notions do you see individual responsibility located? And how does that then relate to collective responsibility? It seems like, in the words of Julia, we're running into the flames. How do we locate notions of individual accountability? And is that possible? And do we then need to learn a new vocabulary to deal with this third layer, to actually interact with it? Hopefully that's understandable.
Thank you. And then we're going to move over there. Yes, please.
Well, thank you, Professor. First of all, it's a great pleasure to listen to you on a Friday evening. It was very inspiring. I too lived during the 2008 financial crisis, and as a small anecdote, I managed 1 week before the collapse of iSafe to transfer my revenue of a full year's work back to my safe Dutch account. So I was on the safe side then. I have 2 items and 1 question. The first is the issue of scalability. When I look at environmental friendly technology, often it's a problem of scalability. There's a paradox with investments, because when you have big money into technology that's not scalable, then it needs to become scalable to become very profitable. So there's a paradox that I see, and that makes it difficult for central banks, from my point of view, to really drive technology transfer. The second thing is that what I see is that most of the focus is going into what I call the technosphere instead of the biosphere. So to give an example, a lot of regulation is oriented on recycling, but in a lot of cases recycling costs more energy. It uses less resources, but it costs more energy to create new products than the original existence, fabricating the original product. In the Netherlands, there's a factory producing plastic bottles, which are produced and then destructed to use in other products, so the other product can say this is made by recycled PET. This is what you mentioned as well about greenwashing. So when you focus on recycling, you're also ruling out basically what's it called? When you get back I don't know the word. So you have like the technosphere and the biosphere, and the biosphere is where it's basically can be used as compost. Some products, but if you can use it as compost, it's not recyclable, so you cannot sell it in Europe. You know, so there's also a paradox. And the third, I'll try to be brief, is about your vision on the failures. You mentioned 3 things. I interpret them as basically as levels. So the first one is basically what you mentioned about the I don't exactly know the thing, but the second one is the communication and the mode of organization. That's a deepening level, and the way problems on communication level are becoming visible is by the first level of failure. The way problems in the mode of organization become visible is by looking like a communication problem. That's my question. Do you agree to that, that those are levels? And my question would be, what would be the fourth level that is becoming visible by that mode of organization?
Thank you. And then I think we had one more question over there, right? Yes. It's okay. I'm going to add something too. He's okay.
All right. Thank you so much for this insightful lecture. I had many questions that were already asked, so I'll try to make it short. I think one answer could be a fourth step, or perhaps a step before that even, to talk about failure. What is the goal ultimately in the end? And that means that we perhaps we see reality as an ideal, and then we have the reality, right? So perhaps it is often, especially in economics, we deal with models, right? And models are ideals. They're never existent in the real world. So it's been a while that I dealt with IPE, but perhaps the models that the central banks envision, they're not really a 101 kind of reality check. And so when we talk about climate change, what is the ultimate goal actually for the international financing system that we are envisioning for a just global world? So I feel like this is maybe a way bigger step back that we have to ask ourselves. Because if we haven't even asked this question, then we're just really in confusion of the smaller steps, right? But if we don't really ask if we don't dare to ask the bigger questions, right? So another question, I'm very critical about sorry, it's not a critique against you or me, but the white man savior perspective that we have to save the world against climate change. I'm just really critical about it, right? And so maybe this notion, this understanding of global politics, that we need to save something, I'm not so comfortable with this. And although it's not only white men that deal with this problem and want to solve it, maybe we need to have a critical stance towards like saving the world as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, so Oliver, yeah, you don't have enough questions yet. I'm gonna add 3, but I'll be quick. No. The first one. So when you started with your talk, then you actually very convincingly you showed us that there is something changing with the discourse, yeah. And then on the other hand, at the end, you come down quite heavily on the organizational mode, yeah. So my question there is, what actually makes it possible for the central bank discourse to change a little, right? Because after all, I mean, you had a couple of quite reputable institutions there, so Bank of England, Financial Stability Board and everything, so something seems to change. Maybe not enough, yeah, but where does that actually come from? Because if this organizational mode weighs so heavily, how can they escape from that? It's basically a structure agency question. The second one is very similar. I had a very similar comment from you in terms of these layers, yeah, because to some extent perhaps this failure, so somehow inroads have been made into communication. So you get these voices. So singular from, say, the Bank of England or the Green Swan report or something like that. But it doesn't go down to the mode of organization. I also had this impression that there may be something about layers. And my third question is about time, because there was somewhere in the title, and it's obviously that's always a tricky one, right? But economists, they're always, it's a very orthodox economist, they always point out, so everything is basically, or a lot of things is a matter of the time horizon, right? So if the time horizon is short, and usually in politics it's very short, then it's very difficult to solve any kind of collective action problems. And if that thing would be a little broader, a little wider, a little longer, then it would be a different matter altogether. But I'd just be interested, and either now or later on over a few drinks, if you elaborate on this notion of time. Yeah. And now you can answer all of those questions.
Can I say, first of all, thanks. This is fascinating. And I mean, if that's exactly the kind of debate I was hoping for. So I said, you're very generous, and you are. I learn a lot, and I'm very, very grateful, because it pushes me to some things where I say, well, issues that are out there where I have to rethink and explore further. So really, thank you. And this is the kind of debate that, where I sort of get in some beers and now we talk. That would be really fascinating, but I think the time is also coming to an end. Okay, I tried to make sense of my notes, which it never works. I'm not sure whether your notes work, but mine never do. The first was about the central bank mandate. No, you. Whether we should just, sorry, what's your name again? Victor. Whether we just let it run. Given that it's too late anyway, let's enjoy the ride. Well, I mean, I can say in Thuringia, where I live, they started to grow wine, and they have a wine museum now, because they said, well, that's what we always had. I mean, memory politics. But so for some of us, that might mean better weather. For a large part of the population on this earth, and as an international relations theorist, I usually try to have like bigger scale in mind. For at least 140 millions, that's not so brilliant idea. And at least we need to have some kind of plan for them. We just cannot say, well, your suffering is fine, but stay where you are. Don't show. Stay put, you know? And if Portugal drowns, well, then we go to Spain and have our holidays there. That doesn't work for a large part of this population. So I'm quite hesitant to follow that route. And there is this talk about resilience. And you find that also in the Green Swan report, I think chapter 4 is it, where they start not to, I mean, chapter 3, I mean, and it's brilliant. I mean, I already achieved the minimum goal, make somebody look into the Green Swan, because it really is a fascinating thing. So thank you. You've proven, you already make me a very happy man, which I am usually. The thing is, so chapter 3 is very much, oh, that's Mark Carney, that framework. Chapter 4 is, that doesn't work, we need resilience. Chapter 5 is then, oh, we need complex adaptive systems, and you economists, you have no idea what you're talking about, we need physicists, life science, or whatever. So, I say, there is already talk, but it cannot be either or, it needs to be as well as. So, otherwise, you need to have an alternative plan for those part of the populations that will lose their homes and suffering. I mean, at least. That's the minimum that we have to do, probably. And just not shoot them at the borders. I mean, that doesn't work. I mean, mandate. You said whether it threatens their independence or not, again, conceptual issue, it depends on, I mean, we know that in the economics literature, what kind of independence they looked for, time time inconsistency problems and whatever you have. We know the models. I calculated them. I mean, I had to calculate them myself. But they're fun. They're great. But they're really fun. What's the notions of independence that's there? I mean, usually it's then the independence from the interference of the government. That's a very reduced notion of politics that is at play there. Is it independent of politics? Or is there not a politics involved by the performative consequences of their policies that are enacted? Usually you would not go down that route, because the consequences of their policies is not felt just by governments, but by wider ranges of, I mean, austerity politics. We know, I mean, what we're talking. The suffering of the Greek people was legitimized by this adherence to Schäuble from the market. I mean, we cannot regulate against the market. We need austerity politics, and they just have to get around it. So all that talk was there. But so there is politics. There's always politics. I mean, the idea that this is just a technical issue is nice to believe in, but probably not really, I mean, what can I say? It doesn't bite when you look at the effects that their policies have and the kind of questions that we then ask usually in international relations. There's always politics, there's always power. There's always the allocation of authority, who's to speak, who's not to speak. I mean, even in all the international committees, who are the experts? And Stieglitz, for example, positioned himself as the legitimate critic. It's like Aldorf, Waldorf, and Stadler from the Muppet Show. I mean, he's the one who's allowed to speak and say, while many others are not entered into the room. I mean, they have to wait in front of the house and their voices are not heard. So there is a boundary, and that boundary is politics. It's always political, it's always negotiated. So doesn't make me a Habermasian, but I mean, so my point would be, what's the notion of independence that's involved? And I think I sense a separation of the economic from the political, which for me is not there. Depends on what you mean by politics then. Johannes. Responsibility. What did you say? And collective responsibility and the contradictions and the differently. And the institutional reform that is there. Thank you. I haven't thought about this that way. Usually what I try to look at is to say, what is the discourse that comes into play when we identify something as a failure? And the empirically is usually an examination of what went wrong, and then you have an inquiry commission or whatever, and then it establishes the facts. And these are then the facts on the basis of which we allocate guilt and accountability, and some people have to go and some people have to pay. In the second, it's this reflexive discourse about one thing. In the third, this is for the question. I'm lost. I don't know what this discourse is when we try to think about institutional rearrangements, not the description of the institutional settings or the speech acts that are possible on the basis of the institutions that we have, but how do we have an institutional forum that comes to your fourth level probably, in which these debates can be negotiated and dealt with. And I think this is something where people scream for it, but don't have an answer. And I don't have an answer, but I really would, I mean, I tried to get there, so thank you. I haven't looked at it as individual responsibility or collective responsibility. Usually in the communication, I say it's my responsibility when I talk to my wife. That's clear. But I will think about it. Thank you. Sincerely. Thank you about it. Because I think there might be something about, I'm not sure whether you can think about examples where in all the three notions there are issues of individual and collective authority. It doesn't work in a straightforward way. I don't think so, but I have to think about it. Scalability and technology. You like paradoxes. me too. I love them. But so thank you. Also, thank you for the example of the biosphere and the greenwashing. It sounds to me that this is linked to the question of circular economies, and I don't have an opinion on that. Usually, I mean, and recycling is something that I've always wanted to look at, because nobody's looking into these markets. And it's $1 billion worth industry. And it's about, I mean, I separate my trash, but then when you realize that less than 10% is actually recycled and the other thing is shipped to somewhere else, and they are the biggest, where they have this big Mülldeponien, the biggest one in Africa somewhere. Nigeria, which is just it's just horrible. So makes you really think about it. I don't have an answer. Let me ask you, because I can probably test an idea with you that I always, because for me it's a problem of accounting actually, because usually, I mean, see Apple. Apple sells the iPhones and makes billions of euros, which is audited and reported, and the share price falls because all the recycling is not their responsibility. So it's a different industry. So how would it look like if Apple was to account for the recycling of its iPhones in its balance sheets? How would that look like? It would wipe out the profits, but it would be a much, much fairer account of their footprint that they are leaving. McDonald's, and we know all about, the avocados that we use. We always have these examples where the ecological effects of our consumption is really astounding, and it's, really astounding. And so the question is, do you think that accounting would be a stop, changing the accounting rules in that direction, that each company would have to account for its recycling? Would that work somehow? Question mark, because otherwise I don't have an answer.
I'm not yet that quickly solution to this problem.
Fair enough. Yeah.
What I hear is that make Apple responsible also for basically getting all the resources back into nature. That is more like that ecosystem where you have then you start to invest in biodegradability instead of recycling, because what David first said about oil and plastics, they are the driving force behind recycling, because there are new factories, there's a lot of money in there, so they can stay their business very long.
And I thought it was the mafia. Well, maybe it's the same.
I'm an engineer, so there's a equal mark sometimes in between. So there's no mark. But accounting basically is the end of the line. I should start with the business instead of with financial. That's the same with from the central bank is if the independence is still there. I think what's valid is that they start asking their question of what is their purpose, because the mandate that they get is politically driven, but when you're a responsible citizen and when you have a position in the central bank, as a human, I believe you have a purpose. That organization has a purpose too. Try to align those, even if it's in contrast with your mandate, you have that conversation. Because you have to do what's right.
Okay, can I?
In the interest of time, let's move.
Yes. But the thank you for pointing out also the layers. I haven't thought about them as layers at all. When you said that, it made some sense and it scares me. because usually how I think about it is in terms of contingencies. So you have one actor, two actors, and then two actors within an institutional framework where you already have a third symbol, kind of structuring the social relations to such an extent that they become interpolaceable. The fourth level is exactly probably what I'm trying to after. Now that you said it, it makes sense and it pushes me, so thank you. That really helped me. I have to think about, I hope they're not levels, but probably they are. And then
I also think they are.
Thanks, Markus. That makes me, that was helpful. Jean-Pierre? The models, not sure whether I fully understood, but I'm not sure whether this is too easy. How can I say that? And it doesn't mean, I don't mean it in any bad sense whatsoever. Not whatsoever, not at all. And of course, not every economist is the same. There are different traditions. I'm very much engaged with various heterodox scenes and things. They're certainly different, and the economic historians are certainly different from the econometrician, and it's certainly different from the theorist, and the theorist is then, it depends on whether he studied physics or not or whatever. So they're all the differences. But maybe my psychological issue that I have, but when I studied economics, you start to think in models. And you start to think, you interpret the world in models. You use models to make things comprehensible when you interact with real-world data or real-world interactions. And we know that all the economic institutions somehow do. In the reports, models scream to you. You can see sometimes the models, how they use it. And then there are performative consequences when you use models to understand and solve practical issues. So it's not that they're ideal types when it comes to their to knowledge, but they're applied. They should be applied. But of course, everybody knows that then you need to have a debate on whether this makes really sense or whether you should not have a different model in place. Sometimes it's just determined, whatever. But I think the performative consequences are there, and therefore I don't see them in the ivory towers. I see them in every talk show. You see them in every talk show, in every newspaper. You see them in everyday practice. The models are there. It screams at you. And it screams in UNCTAD, and screams in every institution that you have. So I don't buy into that. The other things that you pointed at, and this is really interesting, but it's not that part, it's in 6 weeks when I come back, is there's interesting work being done by those who look at indigenous notions of nature, for example. So it's not the Western idea of how nature is to be saved, but about whether we need different notions of nature and interactions in nature and existence and modem to being, which we have to carry forward. And there is this work, and this is fascinating, but then white, yeah. You're right, there are issues of representation and talking about others or on behalf of others always silences those who should speak. So we need the infrastructure, and that's what Spivak told us. We need the subaltern. It's not that we just go there and listen to them and have an interview, but we have to have an infrastructure in which that allows them to be heard and to speak on for themselves. Maybe it's the same infrastructures that you're pointing at. So, those two comments point in one direction that I think I need to go further in order to solve the puzzle that I have. So thank you for that. Markus, thank you. Time. Short, long term, it really... Keynes... In a long time, we're all dead, yeah. But we know that it was introduced. Is there an economist here who could prove me right or wrong? because I think it was introduced in economic theory when Samuelson tried to save Keynes in the US in the McCarthy era, when everything else that was leftist to them would have been considered communism. So to actually frame it in the short and the long term, he was able to sell them Keynes somehow, but of course completely corrupted the Keynes ideas. So Keynes in the Samuelson short-term thing, Richard Price's doesn't have anything to do with the original Keynes when you read him. And he was a brilliant observer. The Economic Consequences of the Peace is a brilliant, brilliant book. Anyway, so I'm not sure whether, I haven't thought about it short and long term. You will illuminate me later maybe. But rather that, and that's the Foucault thing that I haven't touched upon, is that what Foucault showed is that the market as a vocabulary, as a semantics, emerged when there was a broader shift in our understanding of time, not away from the cycles and the eschatological, where the final judgment is essentially giving the reasons and everything there, towards an open future which is uncertain. And this is what was the role of the market, was to organize that uncertain future for which it was blind. The market doesn't care for what the future it organizes. It cares for the efficiency of resources and the selection mechanism. Climate change changes that, because we try to avoid a future that is known while holding on to a vocabulary which presupposes an open future. And that conflict is actually manifested now in scenarios which are now new modes of governance. So every company needs to implement their own scenarios on how the world will alter, and plausibility checks and stress tests and everything that they're doing now. There is a time issue there, but I was thinking an open and closed future, unknown and known, rather than short and long term. But I mean, happy to talk about that later. And with that, I would stop and thank you all very much for the comments, because that was really, really helpful, and I got much more out of it than I actually initially hoped for. Thank you very much.
Oliver, thanks very much. Now we can go outside and we can have a glass of wine together if you want to, and we can discuss. We can continue the discussion informally. Okay, thanks a lot for coming.